Hello, this is Amber Rain Davis. Welcome to my YouTube channel and blog, Notable Ink. Today I'm going to be making a card for Altenew's Educator Certification Program for the Level 2 classes. Products we're going to be using today are Altenew's Magnolias for Her, the Build-A-Flower Magnolia stamp set, also from Altenew, My Favorite Things Etched Flower Background Stamp, and Simon Says Stamps Big U Die. This card is going to feature a watercolor technique from the stunningly simple watercolor techniques class from Altenew Academy. Watercolor is not a medium that I am particularly comfortable with yet. It's something I'm definitely working on, and I've seen from this class a huge improvement in my abilities to create a really nice finished product. So what I'm starting off with here is covering the petal with a layer of clean, clear water. You don't want it bubbling up on the surface, but you just want just enough so when you add some pigment, it starts to run and flow in that clear water that you've put down. So you can see I'm using three different brushes. One is for my clean, clear water. One is for the ivory black Mijello Mission Gold paint that I'm putting at the base of the petal. And then the other number 2 size brush is for the bright clear purple from that same paint set. This is a great paint set that I highly recommend. The brushes that I'm using are the silver brushes from the Black Velvet line. And I believe I'm using a 2, 4, and 6 today. So again, I'm going to show you a couple different petals and a leaf so you can see the technique. There was actually well over 2 hours of footage for this video. The watercoloring, since it's a new technique for me, took me quite a long time. I did it over about a 2-weekend period. Before I started watercoloring, what I did is I stamped the flowers, leaves, and buds and clear heat embossed them. The clear heat embossing will create a well around the edges of each individual petal, which really helps to prevent bleeding into the next petal. I was still very careful to not paint 2 adjacent petals next to each other to further prevent any kind of bleeding into each other. With the 2 flowers that I did prior to the one you're seeing now, because I had mixed the paint too lightly, I added too much water to the paint, I actually needed to put 3 layers of paint over those flowers. So I'm showing you this last flower and the leaf in the video because by the time I got to those, I did become more brave, got a little bit more bold, and used more pigmented mixtures of paint so that I wouldn't have to do additional layers. That is the nice thing about watercolor though, is that you can continue to add as many layers as you need to get to the contrast that you're looking for. If your paint completely dries on a leaf or a petal, what you can do is cover the whole thing with clean, clear water, and then use the same technique to continue to add more of your black at the base, purple at the tip, and continue to add that contrast. So for these leaves, what I used was sap green for the bright green, and then I used hooker's green to add the contrast at the base of the leaf or in those recesses where there would be shadows. The last time I used this stamp set, which I love, this is the Magnolia for Her stamp set, I curled up the edges of the petals to add some dimension to the flowers, and I still felt it looked a little flat in the center. So what you're going to see me do here, which it took a lot of courage to do this, I'm going to use an X-Acto knife, and as you see there, cut some of the petals. So I'm going to pull up some of the edges of these petals, and I'm going to cut about 2/3 of the petal so it's still connected at the base so that I can pull those up and curl those in addition to the petals out at the edges. So I started cutting this while the watercolor cardstock, and this is Arches cold press paper, was still on the hardboard. That'll actually ruin your hardboard, so make sure that you take it off of your hardboard and do it on your craft mat, which you're going to see me do here. The craft mats are self-healing, and so it's not going to be a problem if you cut on them. And as you can see, that's the Vantage cutting mat from Dull is the company. So I'm cutting around the edges of this flower. I did accidentally double cut around the edge, so you can see me just kind of pulling off a little sliver of the watercolor cardstock there. Sorry that I'm out of the frame a couple times while I'm doing this. I wanted to really be able to see what I was doing. So I'm sitting there. I'm a little bit regretting doing this. I'm thinking about, okay, what am I going to do from here? I'm not going to start over at this point after a couple weekends of painting these. So I'm going for it and I'm cutting the next petal. So again, going around the edges, pulling up those edges, and making sure that I'm cutting enough so that I can pull that petal free. So here I felt like it needed a little bit more dimension. So you're going to see me start to cut a third petal. And you're going to find that I found that that was a mistake. So I'm going to cut this third petal after thinking about it. And then you're going to see me pop that petal back into place. What you're going to see is that when I start to pull up this third petal, because it's adjacent to that petal on the left, it leaves a gaping hole. So there's just too much space after making this cut. You're going to see it right here. So it makes a very large hole. So I popped it back into place and I'm going to end up gluing that to the card base. So what I'm going to do here is add some paint to the edges. So once you cut the cardstock, what you're going to find is that the edges are going to be bright white. And so I went around those edges with some watercolor paint to mask those bright white edges. And then for the petal that I popped back into place, I want to add some additional contrast there so that it's less noticeable. So that's how I got around that little error. For the petals that I am going to pop out, I'm going to take a black marker and go around those edges there, which just adds a nice finished edge and masks that white edge from the cutting. You want to make sure when you do that from the back of the flower so that if your marker slides, you're not going to mark up the front of your flower. So that's going to be really important. I'm cutting around the edges of this bottom flower so that I can pull that up a little bit more. I'm going to use the marker to go around the outside of the flower, just the petal on the bottom, and then I found I really didn't like that. So you're going to see me cut around that black marker and take that back off. When I had die cut that particular flower, I was a little offset, so you saw me just trim off a little of the excess white around the edges so that it matched the other two flowers better. So I wanted to have a background on this card panel. This is the My Favorite Things etched flower background stamp, which is beautiful. I really do love it. And I am using a light gray cardstock and Versamark ink to do a tone-on-tone background. I only needed to ink it up once, but you do need to press fairly firmly in order to get good coverage. Now you're going to see me take those die cuts and arrange them on this panel to figure out how do I want them, what I want them to look like. Ultimately, I don't actually end up using the buds or the leaves. I'll save those for another project, so I'll just pop those in back into my stamp sleeve and save those. And I also don't end up using this full background panel. I found it to be too busy and distracting for the overall piece, so I do end up cutting that down. For my sentiment, you could see me pull off that stamp there. That was from the Build-A-Flower Magnolia set, and I didn't feel the U was quite large enough to carry the card, so I switched over to using the U die from Simon Says Stamp. This I felt like was a better arrangement, so I'm using just a small strip of that background to ground the flowers, add a little bit of extra interest behind those flowers. And then the Are the Best stamp that you see up there is from the Build-A-Flower Magnolia stamp set. So I'm just going to trim off the excess edges with a pair of long scissors so that you get a nice straight edge. And then we'll get the sentiments adhered and get the flowers adhered. So to adhere the flowers and that gray panel, I'm using Tombow Mono multi-adhesive, and I'm only putting it on the center of the flowers, being sure that I don't get any glue on the petals that I have cut and pulled upwards so that I can curl those up. I also don't want any glue on the outside edges of the petals so that I can curl those up as well. This particular stamp set is beautiful. You're able to interlock the petals, so you can see there's a deep cut in that almost individual petal that sticks out. I'm able to interlock that, which I feel adds a nice organic feel to the overall arrangement. It looks like that's how the flowers would be placed in nature. I did not actually cut out any of the petals on the white flower. Part of me wished that I had, but I feel like the overall effect was really nice, even with the edges pulled up in the back. So we'll get the U adhered, and then I'm just adding some pretty pink posh marshmallow colored sequins here. They're a nice sequins for just a subtle touch. And after that, this card will be complete. I encourage you to check out the Altenew watercolor classes. They've really been helpful to me. I think that you would enjoy them. Here's a picture of the completed card. You can see all that amazing dimension that was created just by cutting around just one or two petals from each of the flowers. If you've enjoyed this card, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, my blog at notableink.com. You can also follow me on Instagram. I hope you have a great day. Thank you so much for stopping by.